Hello, Kingston Clan. How you doing? Session 3 here. Papa K on life. The last one. Hopefully, I've said a few things here that help anyone in the family down the road. I hope you'll all share it with your family and their kids and their kids and their kids. And that again, somewhere down the road, somebody is helped by it. So let's recap session 2. We talked about how at a certain point in your life you reach a crossroads and you have to decide, you have to make a decision at a very early stage of your life on a very critical long-term decision. And you're basically deciding between the social construct, what society says you should do, and your spirit, what your insides tell you should do. And once you make that decision, mostly if you decide for the social construct, you can change, but it's very difficult. You can change what you're doing, but it's very difficult. The concept, though, that at 20 years old, these decisions define who you are for the rest of your life, that I believe is crazy. You can change. It gets harder and harder to get out of the social construct once you're in it, but to think that you cast your lot at 20, that's just ridiculous. You should look at your life in chapters. I look at my business life, the amount of time I spent in the business world, as a chapter in my life. I don't look at it as something that defined my life. It was one of the chapters. So, know that you can change, but I want to make sure you understand the consequences of the decision and how hard it is to change. So let's fast forward. So you've made your decisions now, and you're 45 years later, and you're 60 years old, and inevitably what starts to happen is you start to assess your life. You start to assess the decisions that you made, and you start asking yourself questions about the life you led, and did you lead a good life, and are you leading a good life? And what I realized is when you go through that assessment is that what's really important is the scorecard that you set for yourself. What I mean by that is when you look at yourself and ask yourself questions about yourself, and if you've done good things or led a good life or whatever, again, based on what? What are the things that you set out to yourself to be in your scorecard, right? So was the number one thing in your scorecard is I want to be a millionaire, or was the number one thing on your scorecard was to lead a happy life, and so what was your scorecard based on? And it becomes important when you start reaching the end, because what you start realizing is you end up back in the exact same place you started, and that is with family, with your family around you. And we start as good people, and the goal is to end as good people, right? We start as unadulterated children that are pure and are good, and the goal is to end the same way. And what happens in the middle is what happens in the middle. But at the end, you start assessing that, and it's based on your scorecard, right? You start assessing yourself against the goals you set and who and what you wanted to be in life. My scorecard personally was based on the lessons I learned from Pat and Dorothy, right? Have I, lived an honest life with integrity and work hard and try to do the right thing, try to have compassion and empathy for people? That's my scorecard. When I judge myself, I judge it against that. And clearly, we don't know how we're doing until the very end. And I want to give you an example of what becomes important at the end. So I had a lifelong friend, grew up 2 houses down from us as a kid, Randy Reish. And Randy, right out of high school, got married to his high school sweetheart, started having kids, went to work for a local park district. cutting grass basically. And over a 30-year period, Randy became the supervisor of the park district, and he became a beloved person within this town. Well, Randy died suddenly of a heart attack, and I went to his funeral, and you would have thought that Michael Jackson had showed up. Probably a bad example considering where he ended up, but I'm talking about the amount of people there and the people that had to be at this event. And there were so many you couldn't get into the church. The people had flowed out of the church. There were so many people were parking miles away. And this was a guy that, wasn't rich, wasn't famous. What he was a great guy. And at the end, when you're standing there, it's your deathbed, your life flashes before your eyes. People say your life flashes before your eyes. Well, what that is your life. You're judging your life. It's you judging your life. In those final moments, you judge yourself. Was I a good person? Did I do the right thing, right? And it's never about money. Money's never mentioned. How many houses you had is never mentioned. So it's purely about how good of a person you are, and and I think that that should be what you strive for in life is on your as you're dying, you assess yourself and you say, yeah, I did a good job. I was a good person, and I had empathy for others. I had compassion for others. I tried to do the right thing. I worked hard. I did it with integrity. Was I a good person? I think that becomes the question at the end. And we all make mistakes, and we all falter from those goals, and we all do bad things. Most of us, 99% of us, don't do bad things that would ever equal what society judges as heaven and hell, right? Like, most of us, like, we say a bad thing to somebody. Well, you're not going to hell for that, okay? You're not going to judge yourself at the end of the day for saying that. It's the big things, right? So that's your heaven and hell, and at the end, that's what happens. And so, I know that one of the things that Grandma was most proud of is the family. How none of us were derelicts, that we know of. None of us ended up in jail or prison. She thought, and she was right, that all of us were good people, and that that her and Dad had produced a good family, and I believe she was right, and I believe it's incumbent upon us to make sure that continues, and by trying to educate them and give them the path to leading the good life that they want to lead. So that's my story. I'm sticking to it. 7 decades on this planet. At the end here, what I care about is how I led my life and how I'm going to lead it till the end. So as always, I got nothing but love for you, family. Papa K out. Be looking for those videos about food. A bunch of them are coming shortly. Love ya.